Welcome to A Rabbi and a Lawyer Walk Into a Bar, a podcast with relatively well-informed and irreverent musings on religion, news, and society. And now, for your hosts, Rabbi Asher Lopatin and John Geringer.
Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Asher, I've missed you. Where have you been?
Oh my gosh, very busy. Ann Arbor and the shul and really good things, actually. Good, even though we're going to talk about the 17th of Tammuz, Shivasar B'Tammuz, but really some good things happening, really good, bringing people together, which is great. Diverse people, Jews, non-Jews, everyone.
Oh, you are really in your element. And it's my fault too. I was traveling and busy and all of that. But luckily, the summer has slowed down, which gives us a chance to actually chat. Although I always hated that just when you get ready for the summer, into the fun stuff, our faith throws this sad 3 weeks at us. Why is that?
Yeah, the 3 weeks, the Bein HaMitzarim, these are like, it starts with the 17th of Tammuz, where there are a bunch of bad things happened, of course, but really it's the breaking that the Romans broke through the wall for the Second Temple period. And actually bad things happened also in the First Temple period, but it gets us rolling till we hit the 9th of Av. So 3 weeks from now is the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, and that's when the Romans utterly destroyed Jerusalem. These are 3 tough weeks, but the idea is that we're supposed to do teshuvah, repair the world. Even the fast that we did this week is really, it's not about torturing yourself. That's Yom Kippur. But this is just about getting you to think about changing your ways. And is there something I could do to be better? And it's really about repentance. And so all these 3 weeks are like, can we shift direction a little bit? Are we heading from the Romans breaking through the wall to destroying the temple, or can we head in a different direction? Of course, post October 7th, we're always thinking of maybe these will be 3 weeks. Maybe this will be a time when the hostages come home and when there's a breakthrough, a victory over Hamas. And it's really a time where it's sad. And there are mourning customs. You're not supposed to have big parties. You're not supposed to wear new fancy clothes or anything, like get a new car or anything like that. But it's also the opportunity for growth and for shifting and for changing our ways. So there's that positive side.
And I feel like with many things in our faith that people seem to focus on, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do that, sort of the mechanics, without thinking about the meta reasons we're doing these things, right? You get hung up on the minutia sometimes.
And actually, the source for these holidays, the biblical sources from the prophet Zechariah, one of the last prophets in the Second Temple period, but he prophesies, God says these are going to be celebratory times. These are going to be great times where we're going to look back and say, wow, things really turned around. I think we got to have that attitude, really, that we're given guides by the laws, but it's really for us to really come up with trying to make ourselves better and the world better. And it doesn't always seem to be doing that way, but we're not going to get, I don't think, deep into politics in this podcast this time. But interesting things happening with Biden pulling out and Kamala and the
Bibi coming to the Hill and giving his speech.
Yeah, we got to unpack all that stuff. But I think we wanted to focus on this theme of tshuva, is it possible for us really to change our ways and to be different? And I think, John, you met someone who really might inspire us in that direction.
I did. I was even able to give the summer sermon at our shul at Moriah, where I mentioned an episode involving our guest for today. His name is Jeff Schoep. He is the former leader of the National Socialist Movement, who, Asher, in our world, in the Jewish world, we call someone a Gadol Hador, right? A sort of the big guy of the generation, usually in connection with rabbis. But I think it's fair to say that Jeff is the Gadol Hador, or at least formerly was, of the neo-Nazi movement. Wouldn't that be fair to say, Jeff?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
All false modesty aside, right? You and I met at a friend's house that they were hosting in connection with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which, of course, is the Jewish human rights organization that confronts anti-Semitism and hate. And our mutual friend Allison Pierce-Slovan brought you to my friend's house. So here I was eating bagels with the former head of the National Socialist Movement. And we really hit it off because we were talking about our opas, our grandpas, playing for the wrong team in World War II. And that led to all sorts of fascinating discussions. So, Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
You also have to unpack that, your grandparents, your opas, what's the story with that?
Yeah, we will get to that. As I mentioned on the podcast before, Opa means grandpa. My grandpa, my mom's dad, was in the Wehrmacht in World War II as a tank commander in the German army. And Jeff, why don't you give us a little bit of your background before we get to you? Tell us about your family.
Thanks, first of all, John and Asher, for having me on the program. It's an honor to be here. And yes, John, it was a fascinating conversation. And my opa, my grandfather, also fought in the German army during World War II. And my great uncles, one was injured in the Ardennes offensive and was blown up in his tank. And the other great uncle was captured at Stalingrad. He's one of the officers that was captured there. So there's a lot of family history there. I'm a son of a German American, or a German immigrant, excuse me. And that was the trajectory, I guess you could say, that got me involved and curious about neo-Nazism and into that lifestyle. And it wasn't something that my family or my grandparents or anything like that promoted or approved of. In fact, they were quite against it. But it was that childhood fascination with that family history that started the trajectory for me. So it wasn't anything that I was taught at home or anything like that. In fact, I would say about 10 years ago, maybe, I'm terrible with dates and times, but about 10 years ago, my opa had sat me down and tried to tell me, if you continue in this lifestyle and this movement that you're involved in, you're going to end up in one of two places, prison or death. I was so radical at that time that I even then, where I was just like, you might have given up, but I'll never quit fighting. And it was very disrespectful. And it was a long time in that life, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we're going to unpack all of that. It reminds me what he was talking about, the same thing. You've seen the famous video with Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about the folks of his parents' generation who were all broken men because they fallen into this horrific ideology, and it haunted them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, wow.
And your name came across my radar even before we met because it was some of the work I do, terrorism financing and the like, and extremism. And I was talking with some folks at Integrity First, which was the organization that led to the lawsuits that wound up suing you for civil disobedience in connection with the Unite the Right, the Charlottesville events. But before we get to that, let's take a step back and tell us how you went from cute, innocent baby who loves everybody and loves the world into this toxic ideology you fell into.
That's a long story, but so I grew up in rural Minnesota, and my father was an American, married my mother, met her over in Germany, and they got married. And like I said, I was not raised in the ideology or anything like that, but it was this fascination. I'd always been fascinated with history, still am, but now it's a lot different. But I just had this, and my goal was to join and get involved. And when I was by the time I was 18, I was already involved at that point. Joined the National Socialist Movement and rose up through the ranks quite fast.
Jeff, was there like a local chapter in rural Minnesota, or?
No, actually, I had to search it out. And back in those days, so we're talking like 1992. So you had to really search this stuff out. And I had tracked down these organizations, and actually I'd found a book in the library. And in the back of the book, there was like a glossary of all the groups that participated in the book. And that's where I found addresses. And there was nothing there in Minnesota, but I started writing to all these different groups. And I came across...
For you young kids who are listening to this podcast, a library is a large building filled with books. It's where we learn facts before the internet. Go on, Jeff.
That's important to say, actually. Thank you for that.
And a lot of dangerous books are in the library.
Apparently, I was searching this stuff out. So I want to say that the book was probably written by a sociologist because it was interviewing all these people in the movement. And that's why there was, just to explain it a little better, that's why there was those addresses in the book, because it was all the people all the groups that participated in this particular book. So that's what started it off for me. And I was writing to everybody in the book. And eventually I found the groups that were, or I got in touch with the groups in Minnesota and met up with everybody. And what I wanted to join, what I was looking for was specifically neo-Nazism. I met up with skinheads. I met up with Nationalist Party at the time, which I don't think exists anymore, but I met up with all the groups, a small clan group, different groups like that were involved. And I wanted to be part of the National Socialist movement because it had the historical connection. The guy that was running it at the time had served with George Lincoln Rockwell, who was the original founder of the American Nazi Party back in the 50s. So again, back to that historical connection. And I got involved, I joined. I was going under a fake name when I was involved. I was going under Jeff Stevens because I felt like my name isn't very common and it's an unpopular movement. People could harass my parents. And I was also a singer in a band at the time, and I didn't want to ruin that.
So they had doxing even then.
They did. There was not, the word dox wasn't out yet, as far as I know, but I was doxed before doxing was a thing. And
so, Jeff, let me just stop for a second. What was the fascination, the hatred of Jews? Was it the pride in Germany? Was it something else?
It wasn't necessarily the hatred of Jews. All of that came after getting involved. So then you become indoctrinated. You're reading all this stuff. I'm reading Holocaust revisionism. I guess I could have explained this a little bit more fluidly as well. My family, my mother's family, they're from Prussia. So after the war, Prussia was given over to Poland. It was no longer part of Germany. So my family lost their homes. They lost their lands and everything like that. And I guess you could say I felt a sense of injustice about that. That was wrong. And I felt the German people were vilified and things of that nature. So I felt that connection. And I really looked up to my grandfather as well. And I viewed him as a really strong, macho type of guy, I guess you could say. And that's who I wanted to be like, I guess you could say. But again, I don't want to blame it on anybody because it was my own poor choices.
No, but it's interesting.
Did you know any Jews growing up?
No, not at all. That makes it even more ironic because I didn't know anything about Jews. And then when I got involved in the movement and became an anti-Semite, was like, here, this guy's an expert on the Jews. I didn't even know any Jews. I didn't even know any Jewish people. And most of what I knew and I thought I knew was wrong. So like today, when I speak out against anti-Semitism and racism, I'll say that a lot of times at schools and things like that, when I work with the Wiesenthal Center, I'll tell the kids, like, look, you guys remember opposite day when you were in elementary school where you wear your shirt backwards and all that? That was my life. Everything I thought I knew was basically the opposite.
And it's interesting that it comes from a sense of bitterness and anger. I think is there a movement for end the occupation of Prussia in Poland?
They weren't happy. They lost a lot of territory after World War I, which led to the embitterment and the Nazi movement turning into what it became. And then even more, obviously, in World War II, they lost a lot of territory there as well, and they were occupied. So easy to see how that grievance culture could have manifested.
Right.
It certainly is. And it's scapegoating is basically what it boils down to. You don't see that when you're in the throes of it and you're in the midst of it. You don't process those things. But those are all the things that I processed upon getting out, especially after getting out, being able to think through those things and go, wow.
It's ironic because Poland, not all Poles, but there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland. It's ironic that it's Poland that brought this about in some ways, this resentment, and yet they're no fans of the Jews. And so did you mix with you said you mixed with KKK people also?
Yeah, when I was in the movement, and I guess just to explain that, so when I got involved in the National Socialist movement, it wasn't my goal to run the party or anything. I was appointed a local group leader in South St. Paul and was in the press and all this kind of stuff and ended up getting doxxed. And then at that point, I was like, now I don't have a choice anymore. It affected my mother's career, what I was involved in. I saw what that did to her. And instead of backing away, it just further radicalized me. And then I felt I didn't have a choice anymore. So I cut my hair with the band 100% into the movement at that point and just got more and more radical over the years. Whenever there was pushback, whenever someone tried to stop me from getting involved, whenever I got into some kind of confrontations or anything like that, it just further radicalized me. A lot of times I'll tell people that's not the right approach. We know they're wrong when they think like that, but it's the way one approaches that, and the person has to see it themselves that they're wrong, rather than someone telling them. So it's a process, but that's probably a whole nother program and all by itself.
We could definitely do a part 2, 3, and 4. The interesting thing about Charlottesville, the unite the right, is because the right was not united, because there are so many different facets of the right. You've got the folks who are accelerationism, you've got the folks who are white pride, and there's so many slivers of the right wing movement, of the far right and the alt right and things like that. So where did you position the National Socialist movement in that constellation?
That's a really good question. So when I got involved, so I was local group leader, and then within a couple of years, I'm running the organization. So National Socialist Movement, I was the commander or the national leader of it. So the National Socialist Movement would fall into what you would call the hard right. Did not get along with the alt-right at all whatsoever. I had no dealings in 27 years that I was involved. I had no dealings with them until Charlottesville was the first time I really crossed paths with any of them.
Wait, alt-right would be, who would be like in the alt-right?
The alt-right would be, I don't know if I should say names or not.
Oh, no, but let's say like that guy Spencer.
Yeah, he would be like would have been a figurehead of the alt-right.
But they're like the wimps, the alt-right.
That's ones who dress Best Buy employees.
Yes. So the way and I got asked this question a lot of times at talks, and the best way I can answer it truthfully and honestly, transparently, is that we saw the alt-right as like beta males, weak, effeminate, just not. We consider ourselves like the hard right was more your blue collar, working class people, and a lot of tough people. The alt-right was beta male type, and I'm saying that's how I thought of them back
Jeff,
then.
that is so painful. I hope they're not listening to this podcast.
They didn't like me then. I'm sure they don't like me now, so I don't worry.
What about the KKK people? Were they annoying, or they were what about those folks?
And that's a good question too. Now the KKK, I did as the national leader for the NSM. I'm speaking at all kinds of different events, whether it's skinhead concerts, KKK events, nationalist events, all kinds of different things outside of NSM as well. Sometimes I would be invited to Klan events, and the Klan functions in a couple different ways. You've got two types. There's many groups, but there's two types. There's like your old traditional clans, and then there's the modern clans would be more open to work with neo-Nazis and things like that, whereas
they're like the modern Orthodox.
Yeah, see, it's not just the Jews who have so many different factions.
But the old school, they didn't like working with the Nazis.
So the traditional clans considered Nazis anti-American, and they did not like that. And I have a funny story on that. I was at I guess you could say it's funny, but in Mississippi or Alabama, I was at this Klan thing, and some of these people had never seen neo-Nazis before. And I just remember a bunch of them standing in the back of a pickup truck going, "But y'all, I've never seen real live Germans before." And I was like, I don't know if we should tell these guys we're Americans or if we should just let it go. And they're like, "But you guys are all right with us. But if anybody tries to take you back in the woods, don't go or let us know, because that's not going to be a good thing." I was like, "Oh, all right. Thanks, guys."
Oh my God. Yeah, there you go, Jeff. You're just stereotyping people.
Yeah, I'm sure if those
it's a real story.
I'm sure if their grandparents would have known that they were hanging out with Nazis after having been the ones at Normandy, they'd be spitting in their grave.
So it's an interesting, but the skinheads, those are tough guys, no?
Yeah. A lot of the people, I don't know how to even answer. That's a good question. I was known for getting into the streets and mixing it up with the communists and things like that, and fighting and things like that, but never the aggressor. You had to be the NSM. The way I operated, and the reason why I stayed out of prison for all those years, was because you could never hit first. So if you were assaulted, then you could fight back and things like that, but you couldn't kick somebody on the ground. All these legal things. John probably has a lot more knowledge about the law as far as what you can do and what you can't do. But I made sure that I didn't break any laws.
Yeah, you were also well known apparently for recruiting the youth, right? The Viking Corps, the sort of high school age people, and indoctrinating them, right? That's where you got them when they were vulnerable?
Some of that is spin. Now, the NSM had a Viking Youth Corps, And it was said a lot on the internet. And actually, because how they were saying that, I ended up shutting that down at some point. And I don't remember what year it was, but it was quite a number of years ago where it wasn't no longer a thing, because I was bothered by that whole thing about recruiting kids. Like, it was being said online that I was the group was focusing on kids. When it was active in the group and when I was there, you had to have parental permission. So if a kid joined, if you were under 18, you had to have your mother or father's permission, and we asked for permission slips and all that sort of thing. So most of the Viking youth was kids of members, party members, or in some cases where the parents would sign off. And a number of times it was, in a few cases, parents that had given up on their kids, like they had gotten into drugs or gangs or things like that. And in that sense, we would straighten them up because we didn't tolerate gangs and didn't tolerate drugs.
So it's interesting. So there is this element of, it was like a tight group, right? There was camaraderie, community. Yeah.
Was it that you said about Jews?
Horrible things.
I mean, that we're cheap, we have big noses.
What you mean, like physical characteristics?
Yeah, like what did you convey? What do you say a Jew was?
Jews, to the people in the movement, the Jews were like evil incarnate. They were like the people that were controlling the puppet strings, pulling the strings on everything in the world. And it's like, now looking from the outside, looking back in, I say sometimes it was so, the anti-Semitism, it was so pronounced. Like, you could spill a glass of water or something and say, oh, it was the Jews. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was like black crime, Jews. It's the Jews' fault. This, an open border, it's the Jews' fault. Everything that people thought was wrong or upsetting, they always had to have that scapegoat. And that's really
the Great Replacement, things like that.
All of it. Yes.
And what did Israel ever come up? The state of Israel?
Yeah. Yes. So one of the bigger gripes, I guess, about Israel for the people in the movement was that one of the claims was that Israelis were the only people that could have dual citizenship. Now, I know that's not true now, but that was a big gripe. It's like, how come Israelis can vote in our elections and things like that?
So it was anti-Israel also. It wasn't so interesting. But you didn't have a title like Reichmeister or something like that?
That sounds like a kitchen tool.
Right.
Trying to channel a little German. Or
that was good. That was good. No, it was the commander was the national leader, and then the organization had ranks, so it was American ranks. But there was a time, I don't know if it was back in the 90s or early 2000s, but some of the guys were actually using German ranks, and I put a stop to that because I didn't like it.
I was going to ask that. So how many new Germans studied Nazi history, understood Mein Kampf? Was there a knowledge? Sounds like you had a knowledge base, but the rank and file today, they know what a Nazi was? Did they knew who Goebbels was? Did they understand their Nazi predecessors?
A lot of them did. There's a lot of different dynamics. So you would have some groups, some of the people that were in for a long time, they had some knowledge and stuff, but there was new recruits and people that were joining that didn't. And there was a little bit of where some people thought you had to be German to join the group. And that's why I started in later years, Americanizing the organization, did a couple of rebrands over the years and things of that nature, because we had people coming up all the time. I don't know if I can join because I'm not German, or why are you guys Germans, or just things like that. So there was a lot of confusion and things like that over the years too.
Did you do what the SS did and go back to bloodlines to make sure that they were pure?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that was a big issue, because especially in America, you've got a lot of people that are part American Indian or things like that. And the Germans rule, I think, was 1/16 or 1/8, maybe. I think it was 1/16. And then, so we were like, it's going to have to be the same as that. And then sometimes you'd have somebody come in and say, I'm an 8th American Indian or whatever. And we don't tell anybody that, don't repeat it. So you'd still accept them sometimes, but then there's people that are coming in and other people would say, if you look white, then you're white. So there's a lot of kind of hypocrisy in those scenes. And it's even more so now, I think.
But it was definitely racist, like against Latinos and African Americans.
Everybody. Yeah.
What about the LGBTQ? Was there an element of hatred about that or not?
Yes. For me, not so much. That wasn't as big of an issue when I was involved, and I'm ashamed to say it, but it was more like I was an anti-Semite and not as much of a racist. In the earlier years, there was more racism there, but that changed, and it just became focused on anti-Semitism. But yes, those groups, they hate everybody basically, or everybody's the enemy, and not just when I say everybody, like literally everybody, like white people that are aligned, that are against them, anybody that's not involved. And then they fight amongst themselves too. Like most of the violence that I faced over the years was with other white people, almost entirely, which is surprising to a lot of people. But
Other white racists or other white, just white people on the other side?
I'd say about 50-50, because there was a lot of violence. There was violence between the groups a lot sometimes, but mostly fighting communists and far left activists and Antifa, stuff like that. A lot of violence there, but also some violence in the movement and with other groups as well, because they would fight amongst themselves about religion, power, influence, different things like that.
We could spend hours talking about that, but I want to talk about, since this is the 3 weeks that we talked about earlier, and we're talking about tshuva and repentance and things like that. Tell us about, I know you had 2 very powerful conversations that led you to a different path. Walk us through that, please.
Oh, this is the more positive part of this story.
That's right.
Yes. So when I was involved in it, as I may have mentioned, like no one could get through to me. No one could reach me. My family tried. Everybody tried. And no one could get through. And in my role as commander of the National Socialist Movement, a lot of times I get contacted by different TV programs, documentaries, news, you name it. And I would do all these different interviews. And I got contacted to do an interview, and usually I would do due diligence and do background checks on all these to make sure it wasn't a setup or to see what the program was about. But in this case, I had gotten a call, and a guy on the phone made the pitch, and I said, "That sounds good. I'll do it. I'll be there." And I didn't do any due diligence, so I didn't know who I was meeting this time, and I don't know if this was fate or what was going on. I just had a lot of stuff going on, but I feel like now it was fate. And the person that I met was Daryl Davis. And should I explain to the audience who Daryl Davis is? Daryl is an African-American musician. He played with Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Chuck Berry. He's a phenomenal blues and rock and roll guy, lights piano keys on fire. And what else he's known for is getting people out of the Klan. He's gotten over 200 people to walk away from hate and racism. Oh, wow. And I'm sitting on a bench outside this place in Montgomery, Alabama, where Hank Williams used to play. So that's where we were, or where he first got started. It's called Chris's Hot Dogs. And we were sitting out, my girl and I were sitting out there on the bench, and this big black man comes walking up and puts his hand out, and he goes, "You must be Jeff Schoep. Hi, I'm Daryl Davis." And we shook hands, and I'm thinking, man, this guy looks familiar. And I know that name, but I couldn't place it. I couldn't quite place it. And we were walking in together, and we sit down, and after a couple minutes or around that same time, I'm like, I know who this guy is. This is the guy that gets people out of the Klan. Ooh, I wish I was ready for this, and I should have mentally prepared to debate this guy. But then so I'm thinking, it's just another day at the office, no problem. But I would have been a little more better prepared. And Daryl and I are talking. We're getting along. Two old friends that we just hit it off right away, and we're talking about music and all kinds of things. I'm realizing we're getting along too well, and we're on camera here. Like, I gotta switch this up. So
the boys at home will not be happy about this.
So all of a sudden I switch, and Daryl will say, "Jeff snapped into movement mode for a minute," but I was like, "I'll fight to the last bullet for my people." And Daryl doesn't react. His face, his mannerisms, everything, he's just the same as he has been. He goes, "Okay." And then he just continues the conversation. So now I'm really intrigued, because usually when I would escalate things like that, that would escalate the other person, and now we'd start arguing or something, and it didn't happen. So now I'm really curious about Daryl. And I tell you, like, by the end of that conversation, Daryl is so perceptive. He goes, we're off camera now. And he goes, "Can I ask you something? I wanted to ask you something, but I want to ask you in private, away from the cameras and everything." And he asked me about, he had heard some rumor, because Daryl hears a lot of things, about a girl that I was seeing. And he goes, "But I don't think that is the girl that's with you today." And I didn't want to say it in front of her, because she looks like the type that might get a little And I was like, whoa, this guy is so perceptive, because she would have went off about if heard about the other girls. I was like, this guy can really read people. He's really perceptive. He's really interesting. And I was totally intrigued by him. But and we swapped numbers, and I didn't really think about it a whole lot more. But what he said to me in that meeting that really got to me and got me rethinking about what my trajectory was in life and the movement was he's asking me about my politics. We shared all that. And then he says, "Do you want to know why I do what I do?" I said, "Yes." And he said, when he was 11 or 12 years old in the Boy Scouts, he was the only Black child in the Boy Scout parade, and white adults were pelting him with rocks.
Wow.
And he had to go home and explain that to his parents, what happened. And he says, I told my parents, I guess they didn't like the Boy Scouts. And they said, "No, Daryl, this was because you're Black." And Daryl said, "Jeff, for the first time in my life, I thought my parents were lying to me. No way could that be true. They're lying. That doesn't make any sense. How can someone hate me when they don't know me? How can someone hate me when they don't know me?" And that hit me. And I'm thinking, when you're having a conversation with somebody, you want to try to put yourself into their shoes. And I'm thinking about my own kids. And I'm thinking about, what if somebody would have done that to one of my kids? How would I have reacted? And that's a question I don't want to answer, but it wouldn't have been good. It bothered me a lot. And I think I know that was like the first seed that was planted that got me to change. And that was in 2016. And by 2017, I'd met Dia Khan, who is a Muslim filmmaker who did the film White Meeting the Enemy. I got contacted by Dia Khan, and I told her originally, I said, "You got 30 minutes of my time, then I'm done. I'm leaving." And we sat down for the first interview, like 4 hours, maybe a long time, maybe 5 hours. A long time went by. She looks at her watch. She goes, "What happened to that 30 minutes, Jeff?" And I said, "I don't know." I was just like, something about the way she was asking things, I could see she was sincere. She was interested. I was one of the main characters in her film, and I'd gotten to know her quite well over the course of that, much better, much more than I had known Daryl. And I really got to see the humanity in her. And by the time we were close to done filming, and there's a scene in the film where you can actually see this because the cameraman caught it and he's zooming in on my eyes, where she says, "Jeff, the ideology and the belief system that you stand for made me feel ugly, less than, not wanted, less than human when I was growing up. How does that make you feel?"
Wow.
Yeah, it was heavy.
So she's a Muslim. Did you have the same feelings towards Muslims that you had towards Jews, or?
No, they were not. The policy that the NSM had on religion was open. As far as the only religion that wasn't really tolerated was Judaism. So there was people in there that were of all different religions. There wasn't a lot of Muslims, but it really was. And there was some members that they really hated Muslims specifically for their religion. But I guess you could say in some ways the group was unique in that sense, because it had female leaders. There was, I don't want to, I dare say it was a little liberal compared to
It
some
was
of the other
progressive, yeah,
groups. It was a
Yeah.
little progressive.
It was the DEI neo-Nazis.
Oh my God. Yeah, so it was a little different.
So then fast forward, but even after these eye-opening experiences, you were still part of Charlottesville, at least to some extent. And then this organization, this Integrity First, sued under the Ku Klux Klan Act, basically anyone they could find connected with that event, because obviously the Trump administration didn't do anything about it. Local law enforcement, I think, was struggling to figure out what they could do. But they used this sort of dormant law to go after through civil courts anyone involved with it. So you find yourself the target of this, and then these lawsuits are proceeding, but yet you've got these two big seeds that are planted. How is that all put in a blender, and what are you thinking at that time?
So after I met, Dia was with me in Charlottesville, actually. She rode out there with us. That was right in the middle of the filming. So it was during that time period that I was going through this change, where I was wanting to leave in some way, where I was not sure if this was the right course for me. The last few years I was involved, and just for the record, I left in March 2nd or 3rd of 2019. And so it was in Charlottesville's 2017, August, I believe. And so I was already at this precipice where I was going, I don't know if I should stay involved in this. And after meeting Daryl and Dia and a number of other people, and just even living here in Detroit had an effect on me, because I'm seeing that this racism doesn't make sense. This is race is a superficial thing. Why am I judging people? Most of the people that I'm meeting from other races are all just like me. I'm even dating girls from outside my race, and the movement doesn't even know about it. Like, I'm doing things like this. So I'd let go of most of that stuff. Anti-Semitism was the last thing to let go of. And we can talk about that too, and meeting the Wiesenthal Center and that, because was really incredible and life altering as well. But yeah, so Charlottesville takes place after, then it wasn't too long after, I'm not sure when, but sometime I think in 2017, I'm served in that lawsuit, and I'm reading through it, and I'm being accused of being a planner. And now I'm mad as hell, because it's like everybody knew the planners was the alt-right, and I had nothing to do with it. And nothing.
Those beta males.
Yeah.
Those beta males planned it. Yeah.
They're good at planning.
The one thing that about Charlottesville, and why I didn't like being accused of being a planner, is I had organized neo-Nazi rallies for 25 years, and not once at any rally that I had ever done all across the country, and we're talking marches on DC, we're talking downtown LA, everywhere, not one arrest from the NSM in all those years. So I was like, my track record speaks for itself. This has got to be a mistake. Why am I being sued as a planner? And so I was,
and certainly you wouldn't walk around with tiki torches.
I wasn't actually at that either. I wasn't at that either. No. So I didn't attend that. I was there for the rally the next day. Yeah, that was a thing. But
so how did you connect then with Simon Wiesenthal Center?
But I wanted to say a little bit more about Charlottesville, since you mentioned it earlier, or maybe it was before we started as well. Because one of the narratives about that case too was that, oh, Jeff Schoep is leaving because of our lawsuit. And this is something that a few years ago I didn't like talking about. It just really got under my skin, and I got angry about it. And it's, why am I getting angry about this? Let's explain this. Let's talk about it. And I want to say, by leaving the movement, I lost everything. Not just my friends and social circle and all that, but I lost my business. I lost a steady source of income.
I'm sorry, Jeff, what was your business? Was your business connected to the NSM?
Yes, my business was NSM Records. It was basically selling music, selling shirts, everything you can imagine that has to do with that world. This business that I had built up from the ground up, and all that, I couldn't continue doing that after leaving the movement too. So I had to give that up and everything else. So I'm going from a position of power and influence, or what people would consider power and influence, and having a steady source of income, to nothing, to being ostracized, to being criticized, to being doubted. And then people saying, oh, he left because of our lawsuit. I lost everything for leaving. It would have made a lot more sense, I'm saying from a practical standpoint, to stay right where I was and continue. So I even lost my ability to pay for a lawyer, because when I left the movement, I lost my job. I lost everything. And then because of how high profile I was, now I'm unemployable as well, because of being on all those TV shows and everything else I was on over the years. All you got to do is type my name into the internet, and you got a million pages popping up that this Nazi guy of this and this. So
yeah, your LinkedIn profile with work experience had to look very interesting.
Well, that's interesting, because
so it was actually the opposite. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry,
right. No, it's because there's a lot of, it's interesting. We talk about tshuva, about repentance, about changing, but it's not easy. It's very difficult. You're on a certain path that works for you, and to switch to a different path. So how did you pick up the pieces after you'd lost friends and business and all that?
I had to make a choice, and I got to the point where I was in the movement, and I always considered myself somebody of principle and a man of principle. So I was always raised not to lie and things like that. Like I said, it would have been more practical or easier to stay, but now then I'd be a fraud. Then I'd be just play acting this role in the movement and not believing what I'm saying. And that's so grotesque to me. And so I was hanging on for a long time. And I remember saying to Dia, even because she was like, you could count the people on one hand that I was talking to about it, because you couldn't talk to nobody. Who are you going to tell? The movement's going to try to pull you back. But I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm unhireable. No, I'm not going to be able to do anything if I give this up. Maybe I can change things. So I'm trying to call it a white civil rights group for a while, for a few years. And eventually I just had to say, you know what? I'm going to take a chance, and things will work out, because I can't do this. I cannot be involved in this stuff anymore. And so it really hurt for quite a while when you had this public narrative that, oh, this lawsuit. I've been sued before. I could care less about somebody suing me.
You could have taken the path of saying, I'm going to extract myself from the movement and head off into the sunset. But instead you said, I'm going to go 180 degrees. And not only am I going to leave the movement, but I'm going to expose the movement. Not only am I going to just stay away from politics and things like that, I'm going to go knee deep into having, associated with groups who are actively trying to engage in more tolerance and against anti-Semitism and the like. So tell us how you connected with Simon Wiesenthal Center, how they vetted you. Because are you grifting? Are you trying to insinuate yourself in a Jewish group? Are you whitewashing, no pun, everything you've done in the past? How did you get through that process? And then tell us what you're doing today with Beyond Barriers.
So I knew I needed to, when I first left, I retired, because I knew I needed the time to process things before I spoke out. And I knew the threats and everything was going to come in and all that, which it did later when I started speaking out. But so I had to process some things. When I said, you know what, I'm ready to speak out, which was around August or September of 2009, I put out a website. I said, because you're right, it would have been a lot easier to just leave or just work in the background or something and whatever, do something, anything else. I knew business. I could have done that. I ran my own business for years, but I felt I need to fix this. I need to repair some of the damage done by the horrible life that I led and all the people I brought into that world, and fix it at least the best I can, and head towards Teshuvah and doing positive things. And so I put out an announcement with a website, and within a couple of days of that site being out, I get an email from, and I can say his name because he doesn't mind, but Rick Eaton at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. He's their chief of, I always get his position wrong, but like the top researcher there, and he'd been there for 30 something years. And he knew very well who I was, because apparently he was undercover at things. So we had met before, and which is another funny story. But so he contacted me and says, he goes, would you like to meet? And I said, yeah, that sounds good. And within a couple of days of that email, he was on a plane to Detroit and came out to meet me. And I remember telling my girl at the time, guys will probably get a laugh out of this, but I remember saying, and this was like, I didn't really think it was going to happen, but it was way in the back of my mind. I was like, if I don't come home tonight, it means that I was kidnapped by the Wiesenthal Center and taken to Israel to stand trial.
No offense, but you're no Eichmann.
I know. I was thinking, right.
Thank God.
Yeah, Mr. Big Shot over here.
But that's what Wiesenthal was known for in the movement, was doing that sort of thing. So
sure.
It was a little bit of a scary group, but I'd met them. And after meeting Rick and going through some of the vetting process, I said, it was nice to meet you. And he says, we've met before. And I said, I don't think so. And he goes, yes. And he rattled off when and where. And
wow.
It was this little meeting, in this Christian identity meeting in Minnesota, that I thought there wasn't even very many people there.
Is he Jewish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one could snuff him out as a Jew.
Yeah.
It was pretty wild.
And then since then, tell us all the great work you've been doing.
So after meeting Wiesenthal, he said, what's your plans now? And I said, I want to speak out. I don't know how that looks. My first thought was, I kept calling it peace building, that I wanted to work in peace building and fix things. And since then, I've been working with the Wiesenthal Center. The first thing I did in 2019, well, actually before I went to Turkey and I spoke at a conference over there. So that was my first speech post movement, was in Turkey. Wow. And at an international conference sponsored by the EU and the Turkish government and all that. So that was really interesting. And then the second one, the first one here in the United States, was with the Wiesenthal Center, and it was at the California hate crimes assembly with senators and Congress people and stuff. They were working on making strengthening California's hate crimes law. So I was a speaker at that as well. And since then, COVID came in the following year, and that put the kibosh on a lot of things. But since then, today I'm working with the Wiesenthal Center as part of the Combat Hate program, where I come in like after the program, and I will speak to school kids. And I've spoke at schools all across the country, but mostly in New York City and the inner city and all across the 5 boroughs there, and just do a lot of things with Wiesenthal, not just with schools, but also with community groups and city councils. And had the honor of meeting some of the hostage families a while back this year.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really heavy.
Wow.
This is amazing. This is, wow. Really. I hope we have more time, more podcasts with you, Jeff.
Yeah, we'll
anytime.
definitely bring you back for some more deep dives, but this has been absolutely fascinating. I can't wait till you make it back here in Chicago and we can continue the discussion offline. But thanks for everything that you're doing. I know it took a lot of guts to do what you did, and I know that it's very much appreciated by the Jewish community, all your efforts.
And we have to unpack, Jeff, how Detroit, you said, had an influence on you also. So very proud to have you in the metro area. So
It's an honor. It's an honor. I'd love to
really
share that. Yes.
great. Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you guys
All
for
right.
having me. It's been a great honor, and keep up the great work you guys are doing.
Thank you. All right, take care. Asher, did he live up to the hype?
He did. I'm so fascinated. And I can understand why you could talk to him for 4 hours. There's like so much, such an interesting guy and such a warm person, actually. I was talking to someone today about like, how could God create such human beings capable of such hatred in this world? Because you think about October 7th and the viciousness of the acts against Jews and kids and parents. But then you say, look, that God created a human being that could turn around and become such a warm, good person that Jeff really feels like. So it's amazing.
Yeah, and he put everything on the line for doing so, and to his credit, and it really feels like he does capture this season.
Yeah, if he could turn around, and then there's hope for everybody, really. There's really hope. And the fact that he's not just stopping the bad and then just moving on, but he's really doing tikkun. He's really trying to repair and trying to remove that kind of hatred from the world. That's impressive. And I think that's part of tshuva also, is not just stopping from doing bad, but really reversing course and really making up for any of the damage that everyone does in this world. But some people do more damage than others.
Wow. And he definitely has swung to make as much as repairs as he can. So I think that's a great way to end off with a note of optimism, as we always try to do. Sure, it's a pleasure. Let's not make it 2 months again.
Oh, no, we're going to be back frequently. So you guys, everyone listening, got to listen quickly, because there'll be a new episode coming very soon. So.
Great to see, as always.
Okay, and good things, God willing, good things will happen over these 3 weeks.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Rabbi and a Lawyer Walk Into a Bar. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to get our next episode delivered right to you. If you really like us, please consider leaving a review and sharing this with a friend. That would really help our efforts. And finally, to contact us and for more show-related information, please visit our website, rabbilawyerbar.com. Special thanks to our production team, David Stone for the introduction music, Andrew Bauman for the artwork, and I'm Nicholas Tantillo. This podcast is co-produced with Front and Social Studios in Chicago. Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. Copyrighted material, all rights reserved.